welcome back to my channel. My name is Payal and I'm back again with another painting tutorial. In this video, we are going to be painting this beautiful glowing sunset. I absolutely love painting these kind of scenes because that gradient in the sky, the glow around the sun, and the silhouette of trees creates such a powerful but calming picture. If you like detailed step-by-step painting tutorials, then you're going to love this one. Grab your paints and let's get started.
So I have my working space ready, and I've also mentioned all the products that I'm using for this painting in the description box below. And we're going to get started with the sketch first. Now, I'm going to lightly sketch the horizon line, and what this does is it actually helps me separate the sky from the land and gives me a clear idea or the base to work with. Now, once that's in place, I'm going to look at what's above the horizon line and what's below the horizon line and start placing these elements very lightly. So above the horizon line, we've got the sky and the tree silhouettes, and below it, we have the land and the water area. I'm not pressing hard with my pencil, so that is something you need to keep in mind, that your sketches don't have to be really intense and dark. And this is just a guide for you to work with when you start painting. Another thing to notice is that you have the creative freedom to change certain things about your reference image and the painting. So your paintings don't always have to look like an exact replica of what your reference image is. We can take certain elements such as the colors, the composition, maybe certain subject elements from the reference image, but it doesn't always have to be exactly the same. Now that we have mapped out our composition, we're going to start painting, for which I'll start off with my flat brush, and we're going to create a few color mixes first. The first color mix that I'm creating is your orange mixed with primary red and a bit of white. So this will give us that warm orange glow at the bottom. Next, I'm taking some cadmium yellow mixed with white, and here's a swatch of that color. And the next color that I'm mixing is my Prussian blue, a little bit of burnt umber and white to create this muted blue-gray shade for our sky. And once we have all the colors on our palette, we're going to start painting. I'm switching to my round brush here slowly to create that warm glow around the sun, because I don't want to cover that area completely, and I need a little bit of like that precise brush stroke in that area. So I have taken my round brush here, and then I'm going to switch to my flat brush and cover the remaining area with this orange shade. Now, if you notice that around the sun, I've used a little bit more pigment just to create that glowing effect, but everything else around apart from that sun area is with the orange color. And once you've laid it out at the bottom of the area above the horizon line, I'm going to switch to my yellow shade and then make sure that that kind of blends into the orange color. I'm using very gentle strokes here, as you can see, and once I've laid out the yellow color, I'm going to lighten it by applying a little bit of titanium white in there, so that the color kind of gradually transitions from a deeper shade of yellow to the lighter shade of yellow, which will later transition into our blue-gray color at the top. I'm going to go ahead and ensure that all these colors that I lay on my paper, that on my sky portion, are kind of seamlessly blending into one another. So if you notice very carefully, I use these very gentle to and fro motion to ensure everything is nice and even, and we're creating that beautiful gradient that we want and see in our skies. Along with the blue-gray color at the top, I've also made sure that I kind of lighten it as I come towards the yellow color, and then using white in that central portion, I'm going to kind of move up and down to ensure that the blend is nice and seamless. So you can see how my brush strokes are very light and smooth, and I really like the blend. So we are going to now stop and let this dry before we move on to the next step. Now that the base of our sky is dry, we are going to start adding the glow around the sun. Using a small round brush that comes to a fine tip, you're going to apply titanium white right in the center where the outlined sun was earlier. And once that's laid in, you're going to load your brush with some deeper yellow-orange mix and create like a halo around the sun. Now this is going to make your sun stand out and create that glow. And once that layer kind of dries in, you're going to go back with the titanium white and place that in, and what that is going to do is create this beautiful opaqueness in the sun, and it's going to have that glow around it that we could see. And I honestly love that about the reference image, and I really wanted to capture that. Now that we have our sun in place, we're moving to the details above the horizon line, that is the tree, silhouette and the foliage. So for this, I've created a mix of black and burnt umber, and the reason I'm not using just black is because it looked too flat, and adding burnt umber gives that a more natural and earthy depth. Using vertical strokes, I start building the background trees. I'm keeping the brush strokes very light and upwards and varying in the height slightly so it doesn't look repetitive. One thing that is very important here is that I am going to stop right at the horizon line. I'm not bringing these strokes below because that would flatten the composition. Now, as you get closer to the sun, you'll have to slightly adjust the color. And why we're doing that is because when the sun is passing through these trees, the silhouettes will not appear completely dark there, and they'll have a warmer and slightly glowing edge. So you're going to mix a little bit of orange into your brown-black color that we've made, and what this will do is create a softer, warmer tone, and that will create that glow and suit the glow around the sun. Now that we have all the colors in place on the left hand side silhouettes, we're going to let it dry, and we're going to kind of repeat a similar kind of structure on the right hand side foliage as well. So this time I've added a little bit more red into that mix. Here's a swatch of that color, and you're going to create these vertical strokes again for the area right below the sun and apply it till the horizon line is. And once you start moving towards the right hand side, you're going to start blending it in with the deeper shade of browns. And when you kind of lay that down first, they might just look like two different colors, next to each other, being next to each other very awkwardly. And in case you end up running into a situation like that, all you have to do is use your damp brush to move the colors around. So unlike watercolors, gouache need a little bit of guidance. You need to tell it where to move. Whereas in watercolors, everything just flows beautifully. So over here, you'll have to kind of guide your paints to blend in. So they might just awkwardly stand next to each other. So you'll have to use a damp brush or go back with, different colors to kind of blend them in. Once you're happy with this, you're going to let this dry. I really like how this looks right now. There is a bit of glow around the sun, so I like that, and even the silhouettes are bringing that depth in. So we're going to let this dry, and then we'll move on to the next step. Now we're going to focus on the area below the horizon line, and this section represents the shallow marshland, a still body of water that's reflecting the colors from the sky above. So whenever you're painting water like this, it's important to remember that the water will reflect what's above it. So the colors of the sky need to be echoed in the water as well, slightly just muted and softened. So I've mixed a very light shade of yellow first, and I'm using cadmium yellow and a generous amount of white for this mix, and I apply this right below the horizon line in one section. Right underneath the tree silhouettes, I've added a touch of brown, and this helps suggest distant reflections in those trees in the marshy water without over detailing them. Next, I've mixed Prussian blue with white to create a soft cool tone, and I applied this to the remaining portion of the water area. So at this stage, the colors may look a little bit flat, and that's completely normal. So to overcome this, you'll have to go back and forth with lighter and slightly darker versions of the same shades. And when I say variations of these colors, I don't mean adding different colors, but I mean just adjusting the values slightly. So a little bit lighter here and a slightly darker color there. And what this will do is create a subtle depth and movement in the water. And since this isn't our main focal point, we don't have to overwork or add excessive details in this area. Once the base layer is dry, I am going to add subtle texture into the marsh area. So I've mixed a lot of yellow into my brown mixture, and using these horizontal strokes, I drag my brush across the surface, and what this does is represent distant grasses and reeds that are growing in the marshland. So over here you'll notice how I'm not adding too many individual blades and details, but this is all happening as a layer of texture. And the area that is right below the sun, I'm going to warm up the mixture by adding a little bit of orange. And why I do this is because this section is receiving the strongest glow from the sun, and it will naturally appear warmer compared to the surrounding areas. So the grasses and the reflections near the center need to feel a little bit more golden and vibrant compared to the areas around it. For the foreground land area, I'm mixing black with burnt umber to create the deep earthy tone, and I'm going to apply this across the entire land section, making sure that it's fully covered. But notice how I'm not using flat, even strokes here. Instead of a flat brush, I'm using a round brush, and what this does is that it gives me more control and prevents this area from looking too smooth or uniform. And I'm allowing slight variations in my brush stroke so that the surface feels a little bit more organic and natural. Once you have like the browns in, you can also vary the different versions of the browns here, and what this will be is just a little bit richer and darker color than the first layer. And you're going to add this color in selective areas, and you're not going to cover the entire section with this color. You're just going to place it in patches, and what this will do is suggest subtle changes in elevation and texture within the lands. Now these small variations in tone help us break the surface and prevent it from looking like one flat block of color. Even in the dark foreground areas, there should always be kind of subtle shifts in value, and that variation is what makes it feel dimensional and grounded. Once the foreground layer has dried, it's time for us to move on to the trees, and we're starting off with the trees that are around the sun first. And since this area is closest to the light source, the trees here will appear warmer. So I'm adding orange to my brown black mix to create that subtle glow effect. Another thing you want to keep in mind is you're not just using orange on the entirety of the trunk, but only kind of towards the left side, which will be receiving the light from the light source. Over here, I'm going to be painting trees that are further away from the viewer, so the trunks should be thin and delicate. I am going to be using my size 4 round brush, but make sure that you apply very light pressure to keep the brush strokes fine. For the trees, I begin with a thin vertical line for the trunk and then pull out branches using small upward flick motions. You're going to press slightly at the base, and as you lift and move outwards, the branches will taper naturally. So you're going to lift the pressure out from your brush as you move outwards for creating these delicate branches. Once we move towards the trees in the right hand side, which are away from the sun, the color of the trees will appear darker. So you're going to not add any orange in this section and just use like a deep brown black mix for creating these trees. And remember, we're not making thick trunks yet because these trees are still further away from the observer and at a distance. So we are not adding that many details and a lot more depth into your trees. Once you're done with the main structure of your trees, you're going to switch to a spoilt brush. A spoilt brush is basically brushes that have its bristles all over the place, like the one that I have right now. And what this does, it creates finer branches and smaller foliage details into your trees, and this is where the trees are going to start feeling a little bit more realistic. So over here I am going to use two different motions. One are like these vertical strokes to show finer branches, and a few are going to be just taps so that they look like little finer delicate foliage. This step, actually all of the steps that are going to come after this are going to really test your patience because the process is very repetitive, but it's something that you will really enjoy because all you have to do is use delicate brush strokes to create depth into your painting without actually worrying about if it's going to look perfect or not, because remember, trees are not perfect. Once the warmer and the deeper foliage is in place, I go back with my size 4 round brush to refine the branches. And I'm doing this because once we add foliage, some of the branch structures get slightly hidden, and going back in helps redefine the form and keeps the trees from looking too soft or undefined. It also kind of adds sharpness and contrast, which makes the structure feel stronger and a little bit more intentional. Now we're going to start building the trees that are slightly closer to the observer, and this is where pressure really matters. By pressing a little bit more firmly, I can create tree trunks that are thicker and branches that are stronger, and that instantly makes those trees feel closer compared to the thin, delicate ones that are in the background. And that subtle change in pressure alone creates depth without needing to introduce new colors. When I paint these tree trunks, I'm not making them perfectly straight. A slight tilt in some of them, just an angle shift so that they feel a little bit more natural. And in nature, trees rarely grow in perfect vertical lines. Some slightly lean left and some slightly lean right. Even when I release the branches, I make sure that they don't all extend in the same direction or at the same length. Some branches are longer, some are shorter, and some are slightly curved. And this variation prevents the trees from looking stiff or repetitive. I also leave small gaps between these branches so that the structure doesn't feel too overcrowded. I'm not adding any foliage on the trees here, and once we've done this part, let's move on to the trees on the left hand side. On this side, I want to add 2 slightly smaller trees first to build the structure gradually. I'm going to begin with the main trunk, then extend outwards with the branches, keeping the base thicker and tapering as I move outwards. And you're going to play around with the shapes here, and I would highly suggest that, because playing around with this and adding different variations in your branches are going to add character into your painting, and everything will not look repetitive and too flat. Once the main frame of my tree is established, I'm going to switch back to my spoiled brush, and with a slightly lighter brown or a warm orange mix, I'm going to gently dab and etch in the delicate foliage. The bristles of my spoiled brush are going to create broken textured strokes which will make the leaves look fuller and more natural. I also slightly thin down my paint so that the strokes don't look too heavy. You'll also notice that by switching the brushes and varying pressure, we're naturally creating depth. Thinner, lighter trees feel further away, and thicker, darker ones feel closer. Once we're done with this, we're going to move on to building the trees that are closest to the observer. So for this, I'm mixing a darker brown, slightly more opaque and richer than the shades we've used earlier. So because these trees are in the foreground, they need to stand out more clearly and have a stronger contrast. So I start by creating the main structure first. The trunk is thicker, more defined, and this time I'm taking it all the way up till the top of my painting. And from there I'm going to start releasing these branches, and then release sub branches from those main ones, and finally add a few delicate finer branches towards these edges. So since these trees are closer to us, they naturally have more detail and a lot more presence. My goal here is to create 2 trees that are in the foreground, and this is very similar to what we see in the reference image as well. One thing to note is that you want to slightly vary the angle of the trunks so that they don't look identical. So make sure that some of them tilt slightly or curve slightly, and these small movements keep the composition feeling very natural, because like I mentioned earlier, trees don't look identical and they're not perfect. So the more character you add in them, the more natural they're going to look. Once you're happy with the main structure of your trees, you're going to go ahead and switch to your spoiled brush again, and then start creating the foliage. So you can see I have about 2 to 3 spoiled brushes with me at all times when I'm painting trees. So I'm going to load up my brush with some paint and tap in the foliage. I'm going to play around with the different variations for brown. So some are slightly warmer, some are slightly deeper, and I'm also thinning down the consistency of the paint so that the strokes don't look too heavy. The tapping motion creates broken textured marks that resemble the clusters of leaves. And if you don't have a spoiled brush, you can always use your fan brush, and if you don't have that as well, you can use a round brush that comes to a fine tip. One thing to keep in mind when you're using just a round brush here would be that it is going to take you a little more extra time. A spoiled brush naturally creates these broken strokes at once, which makes adding the foliage a lot more quicker. With a round brush, you will create 1 or 2 strokes at a time, and it requires a little bit more patience. Now for the next step, I'm adding 2 more trees, and these are going to be the darkest ones in the composition. For this, I'm mixing black, brown and a little bit of green. These trees are receiving the least amount of light, so the tone needs to be deeper and cooler. And that slight addition of green helps shift the color temperature and prevents the dark from looking too flat or muddy. So I'm using my size 4 round brush that comes to a very fine tip, and I build the structure first. And once I have the structure in, I move to a brush that is rounded and it doesn't come to a fine tip, and because of that you'll notice that the brush strokes feel a little bit rougher and a little bit more textured, and that is intentional. Since these trees are darker and more grounded in the shadow, that slightly uneven stroke enhances the realism. So I've added a few of these brush strokes on the right hand side, and then I'm also switching to a finer brush to add more details. Now what this does is makes the uniformity in your brush strokes to be scattered, and it doesn't look too repetitive, and you want that in your trees. Foliage is never too repetitive, right? You've got the leaves moving in all different directions, the branches moving in all different directions, and they have different sizes of leaves. Some are new, some are old, and that's why using different brushes here to create the foliage also adds a lot of depth and details into your painting without having to overwork on this section. Once you're happy with this, you're going to switch to your spoiled or a finer tip brush and create these grass shapes and bring in more texture into your land. Even though we've added like depth and variation on the land, there are a few details that you can add to bring out more contrast into your land. So I'm going to lightly load my spoiled brush with paint, remove the excess and drag around the surface to create textures on the land, and also create broken strokes that resemble grass and uneven terrain. I vary the direction and pressure slightly so that it doesn't look repetitive. Some of these horizontal strokes are slightly angled, just enough variation to make the land feel natural. Then I'm going to lighten the color slightly and create textures on my tree trunk to show that the light is going to catch up on these trunk as well. So go ahead and just go on the left and the right side of the trees depending on which side they are to add a bit of texture in there, and then you can also add grass shapes on the land. Again, we're only adding a little bit more details on the land and trying to not make it look too flat. So adding these little textures and details is going to bring out the land space a little bit more. Next, I'm going to just splatter some dots. So I've taken my brown color and added yellow and white in there, and I'm going to tap it against another brush to create some splatters. Make sure that you're covering the top portion where you don't want the splatters to go, because they don't really fall in one particular direction and they might go all over the place. So you can put some cloth, some tissues to cover up your painting. I'm going back ahead and adding any details that I would like, and once you're happy with this, you're going to let it dry completely. Now that my painting is dry, I'm going to carefully peel the tape off, and you can see how having this clean border already makes the painting look complete, and it's also a very satisfying process. Here's a close-up of your artwork, and I'm really happy with the way this has turned out.
And that's it. This is your final painting. I hope you enjoyed painting along with me. If you're sharing your work on Instagram, don't forget to tag me at The Simply Aesthetic, because I'd love to see your recreations. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to my channel for more such painting tutorials, and do leave your thoughts in the comment section below, because I love reading your thoughts. That is it from me from this video. I'll see you in the next one. Bye!